India, as part of its obligation as a member party to the UNFCCC, has submitted its second biennial report containing updates of national greenhouse gas inventories and information on mitigation actions. The report clearly highlights that as a result of India's proactive and sustained actions on climate change mitigation, the emissions intensity of India's GDP has reduced by 21% over a period of 2005 to 2014. However, in order to continue on this path of achieving its NDCs, consistent and significant technological transformation through collaboration and financial mobilization is indispensable. Organizations like the World Bank play a key role in supporting developing countries in assuring such support and also overcoming barriers along the way. This year, we begin the summit with the theme, Attaining the 2030 Agenda, Delivering on Our Promise, which we host in partnership with the World Bank Group. Amidst us today, we have esteemed dignitaries, members from the ministry, and experts, whom we will hear from in today's sessions. Keeping this in mind, I am pleased to introduce our inaugural panel for the day. Dr. Ajay Mathur, in addition to being TERI's Director General, he is also a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change. Before joining TERI, Dr. Mathur was the Director General of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. In his long and illustrious career, he has headed the climate change team of the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and has also headed the interim secretariat of the Green Climate Fund. He has been a key Indian climate change negotiator and was also the Indian spokesperson at the 2015 climate negotiations at Paris. He's a global leader on technological approaches to address climate change. May I now request Dr. Mathur to welcome the distinguished gathering.
Mr. Junaid Ahmed, Mr. Rashmi, friends. It's absolutely marvelous to welcome all of you here to this session and to the World Sustainable Development Summit. It's a great pleasure for us and an honor for us to do this session and several more together with the World Bank. I want to thank Junaid, the World Bank, for this partnership and for moving this agenda ahead. I want to focus on this issue. How do we move the agenda ahead? For example, this session focuses on implementing the nationally determined contributions. Nobody knows this better than Mr. Rashmi, who for many years led the Indian negotiating team in climate change, the Indian climate actions in India, in the Ministry of Environment, and we are delighted that he is here with us. Mr. C.K. Mishra, the Environment Secretary, who was supposed to join us, called to say that he had been urgently called away on some personal work due to which he had to travel to Lucknow, and regretted that he's not with us here today. He will be with us here at the WSDS tomorrow. When we look at the Indian nationally determined contributions, when they were set in 2014 and lodged with the UNFCCC in 2015, they were extremely ambitious. My colleagues who worked on the modeling behind it would vouch for the fact that we thought that 40% non-fossil fuel capacity was a stretch. We also said that the carbon intensity of the Indian economy in 2030 would be 33 to 35% less than what it was in 2005. But as you heard the Environment Minister say today, in the second biennial update report that India submitted to the UNFCCC, by 2014, we had already achieved a 20% reduction in the carbon intensity. So of the 33%, 20% had already been achieved in the first 10 years of the process. This therefore leads to the question, how do we move ahead? How do we ensure that we are able to incentivize action which is way beyond what the NDCs ask? This is challenge, and obviously the answers are very country specific. But may I suggest that there are two large issues that are helping us. The first is that thanks to the huge contribution made by Germany in buying renewable energy, the prices of renewable energy started tumbling and have not stopped. Due to this, each one of us, particularly in the tropics, has potential for far more renewables-based electricity than we did earlier. I think this is one of the issues that every country, every organization needs to add in their work plans. The second issue relates to the challenge of ensuring that the policies, the investments and business models, and the kinds of technologies are in place so that these carbon emission reductions are achieved. I particularly want to focus on aligning investments and business models. For those of you who are from India, the LED story may seem like a repetition, but I think it's worth noting that in 2014, a LED bulb in the market costed 500 rupees, whereas a normal incandescent bulb costed 10 rupees. 10 to 500, that was the ratio. Even at that price, it would pay for itself in 3 years. But did I buy it? I was in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency at that time. No, I didn't. Because 500 seemed to be too large a sum for a bulb. And the thinking was, if this fails, 500 rupees have gone down the drain. Nevertheless, this was a classic problem of how do we get collective action. And the business model that we adopted was to create a new company, Energy Efficiency Services Limited, which then went out to consumers and said, we will sell you a LED bulb, and we will charge you 10 rupees a month on your electricity bill till the entire money is paid off. So we are not giving it to you as a subsidy, but charging you 10 rupees a month. And by the way, if you use an LED bulb and you are changing it from an incandescent bulb, your monthly savings are of the order of 15, 16, 17 rupees a month. In other words, what you pay is less than what you save. And by the way, if the bulb fails in the first 3 years, we will replace it, no questions asked. There was a tsunami of interested consumers, including many, I'm sure, who are in this room. They aggregated the demand, and then the second thing they did was they turned around and then did bulk procurement. Obviously, they paid for the bulbs, and they got paid later. It just couldn't have happened unless innovative financing was available. And I think the financial institutions, including the World Bank, deserve thanks for their leadership in making innovative financing possible. Today, 400 million bulbs plus LED bulbs have been sold through this route. The price kept on tumbling from one tender to another, and in the final tender, the sixth tender, it is the first one, market price was 500, the first tender, the price was 310, by the sixth it had dropped to 38 rupees, 310 to 38. Again, what I want to focus on is the fact that together innovative financing and business models can greatly influence how NDCs are looked at, how the potential, how the ability to capture the gains from technology can actually be achieved. We look forward to the discussion here, and I am absolutely delighted that all of you have joined us this morning. Thank you all very much.
We thank you, sir, for your insightful views and highlighting the pertinent matter at hand, moving the agenda ahead. Our next distinguished speaker, Mr. Junaid Kamal Ahmed, is the India Country Director of the World Bank Group. Mr. Ahmed was also a former chief of staff to a former World Bank Group president. He has led the bank's works in diverse regions, including the Middle East, North Africa, as well as in India and South Asia. In the past, he has extensively worked on water and the economy and has emphasized on the need for strong institutions and resilience in water management. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Junaid Kamal Ahmed for his inaugural address.
I think it's a great introduction. Former chief of staff of a former president. I don't know if it's good news or bad news, right? Ladies and gentlemen, Bhupen Hazarika was an incredible a musician from Assam, has a beautiful song which says, Bistir no tufare, অসংখ্য মানুষের হাহাকার শুনে গঙ্গা তুমি বইছো কেন? In that song, the singer is asking the river Ganges that in face of all the hurt and pain that the population feels, why are you still flowing? Now, we in Bangladesh, indeed in Bengal, we have many of our poets and singers have used rivers and have asked rivers questions about why they flow despite the pain that they see around them. I've always wondered that if the river could ask us a question, what would that question be? And I suspect the river would say, when are you going to learn to respect me? Right? And I think that this issue of how do we balance our development with the very natural setting that gives us the basis for our development has too long been in the background of the whole debate about development. And it has caught up. It has caught up in the way nature has responded to our development process. But even as we've come a long way to recognize the importance of the need for this balance, as Ajay and today in the morning, several of the distinguished speakers mentioned, there have been some very important victories. The other day I was reading that there may be a chance that the ozone is healing itself, right? And people are beginning to say that the Montreal Protocol and all those efforts to deal with the CCF, etc., has actually started to make an impact. And that's huge. Even if it's just saying it's beginning to heal itself, that's a very important endorsement of global activities to try and change the way we balance development with nature. But that's not all. We all recognize that despite the difficult process of the COPs, the Paris COP was a very important COP. It brought humanity together again to say that we must balance development and protect our environment. And that too, I believe, was a very important statement that collective action can begin to work. When we look at India today, we can celebrate many other victories. India's process of introducing renewable energy at the core of its development world. And as Ajay mentioned, the energy efficiency program is quite extraordinary. But it doesn't stop there. And I think several speakers have already mentioned this morning that the oil intensity of India's development is beginning to fall. And that too is a very important statement, particularly in a context where this country is so oil dependent and oil price shocks have very deep impact on fiscal aspects. Beyond that, the fact that energy intensity of development is falling is extremely important. One can add to it the coal tax that India has put in, which could be increased even more, but is there, and it's having an impact. I've particularly been impressed over the last few years about India's focus on resilience. The whole Prime Minister's Roads program today has adopted engineering standards completely built on the concept of resilience. And that's a huge victory, not only for India, for the world, because the learning that we are seeing here is being passed on to the rest of the world. Similarly, there is a process ongoing to look at how to make cities resilient, right? And that's also extremely important because humanity is moving towards city, and one of the biggest urbanization processes in the world is happening in this country and in this region. So how cities are going to be developed is at the core of the whole story of resilience and sustainability. And that has been a very important focus of Terry's work in India. But we have a long road ahead. And the long road ahead starts off with what you already know, that we aren't actually going to be able to hit the 1.5 degrees and indeed the 2 degrees unless we do certain actions. And I look at India and I realize that despite the shifts it has made, there are many challenges ahead. Take, for example, the relationship between economic growth and air pollution in India. India is on a more pollution-intensive growth path than other countries of similar income. What's interesting is all of South Asia, my country, Bangladesh included, their growth path is far more pollution-intensive than growth path of regions and nations anywhere in the world. This is something very, very disturbing. In the case of India, this growth path is driven by states mostly in the Indian Gangetic Plain. And the high pollution intensity of India's economic growth is not the norm. Other countries have had rapid growth phases, and in fact even stronger growth phases than India, without the commensurate decline in air quality. Right? There are two puzzles here that are interesting about India's growth path. The states of Bihar, Jharkhand, UP, and West Bengal, while having some of the lowest GDP per capita in the country, have a much higher level of air pollution as compared to, and one must compare it to, other countries of similar GDP per capita. This is very strange. Secondly, states such as Delhi, Haryana, Punjab have high levels of pollution despite being relatively rich. Countries at income levels comparable to these three states were able to reduce air quality while continuing to grow. So the path that India has taken in its growth trajectory is leading, as you all know as inhabitants of India, to an air pollution story that's quite difficult. Right? So that's one example of a challenge that India faces. And of course, it's not only India. Air pollution and economic development, we're now beginning to see across the world. Another is forest. India has made a commitment in the NDCs, which are quite bold. But to be honest, India's had a forest policy for several decades. And if you look at the numbers, today 24-25% coverage of forests, which is wonderful, hasn't really shifted much over the several decades. So while there is positive news, if you look at the dynamics, it does not augur well for the future. How India will look at its forest policy will truly make a difference not only for India, for the world. So air pollution and forests are just two examples of the type of challenges that the world faces in terms of balancing this relationship between economic development and nature and environment. So we come to today's conference, which has now become a very important part of the global dialogue on climate change and on sustainability. And I must congratulate Terry for creating this global dialogue. What do we expect from such a gathering, given the context that I have just described? Well, at one level, it's obvious. What do we learn from each other? The technical knowledge. Right? So if India is investing in resilient roads, what does it learn from investing in resilient roads, and how can that be shared with the rest of the world? In fact, on resilience, I look at this gathering and this dialogue in the hopes that it will actually create a network of knowledge centers focused on resilience. It's very important to do that. We need to understand when the Netherlands says that it believes in let the rivers breathe and that it has the technology on groundwater management, what does it mean when it says let the rivers breathe, and what is its technology in groundwater management, and how can that be shared with India where groundwater is in a crisis state, right? That knowledge, that technical knowledge and the networks of knowledge centers, we have not yet invested enough, and we, the World Bank, have not invested enough. This is something very important to do, and I look at a gathering like today's as a very fundamental part of creating that network. But that's not enough. I think all of you who are here have to go beyond the story of learning best practices and technical knowledge, even though that is critical. I think you have to address the one big question: what is the political economy of what it will take to achieve sustainability and resilience? We have to invest in our understanding of why countries move in a certain direction, what political forces enable it to move in a certain direction that delivers the results of sustainability and resilience. If we don't invest in understanding how politics and institutions move, I don't think we will be able to achieve the type of gains that we need to achieve in our battle to bring balance between economic development and protecting the environment. Let me give you a few examples. Let's go back to air pollution. You know what's interesting about air pollution? Most of you know this. It just dawned on me when I was reading some of the material. We're very aware of watershed, right? And we understand that watershed means that water bodies have several stakeholders that influence that one common water body. So we look at it from a point of view of watershed. We don't look at air from the point of view of airshed, right? So Delhi's air is not only caused by stakeholders inside Delhi, or the pollution in Delhi. It is caused by what happens in surrounding states and the interaction. Now, if you're going to deal with Delhi's air pollution, you have to bring the stakeholders that influence that air shed. Now, good news is, most of the cities in India, the air shed is within the state. So the politics is between the state government and its cities, right? But it's still the politics. How do you bring the stakeholders together to actually say that we will manage this airshed? That perspective, I believe, has not yet been taken and needs to be taken. I'll go even further. I think one of the areas that we have to invest in is state capability. State capability to address sustainability and resilience. And in the context of federal India, investing in the ability of the states of India to manage climate change, resilience, is going to be the critical story. The future of India lies in the states of India. The future of India's ability to deal with sustainability and resilience lies in the capability of states to do so, and with it, of course, the global implication. You know, I went, maybe 10 years ago, I went to a lecture given by Professor Schelling, who won the Nobel Prize, and he was running a committee on climate change at that time for the US government, and he made two important points. First, he said that the answer lies in developing technology. That's the opportunity. Given the crisis, invest in technology, and that'll change the world. But he then quickly says that the investment in technology is a completely political game, right? Just like, think of the world of pharmacy. Medicine being produced in one country, and what is the price of it? And look at where we are today, because nations have taken, especially nations like my own, Bangladesh and India, have completely changed the politics of how medicine is developed and how it's priced. There has to be an understanding of who invests in technology and how that technology gets available everywhere. That was the first point he made. The second point he made, which was quite, I think, powerful, he said, the best route to supporting countries like Bangladesh that are facing global climate change is make them rich fast. Because nothing is more resilient than becoming middle income. Very interesting point. Right? Now, of course, some would say to become middle income, I need to draw on coal, right? If I want to become middle income quickly, right? That's our challenge. Right? If you want your citizens to be resilient, you have to make them rich enough to be resilient. Poor people being resilient is not an easy game. Right? But if you're going to make them rich, you're back to the same puzzle. How do you create a growth path that respects the environment on which you build? Let me not shy away from talking about multilateralism and the World Bank. I'm very proud to be in an institution that has made the focus of climate change and resilience an important focus of its program. Last year, the World Bank, the largest program for the World Bank was India. It was $3.5 billion of lending, 60% climate co-benefits. No program anywhere in the world of the World Bank do we have 60% climate co-benefit. Our corporate goal last year was 28%. This year will be about 40%. India, we struck 60% last year. I'm also very proud that in terms of the work that we are doing, we are now supporting 18 countries against a target of 30 countries by 2020 in their implementation of the NDC. And that's extremely important. We've also put aside a commitment of spending $200 billion over the next 5 years in the area of climate change and resilience. Having said all of that, I have to say that multilateral institutions have to go even further in dealing with how to bring political cooperation around climate change. It's easy to say we're putting $200 billion, right? But do we have the ability to actually work on the political economy that's needed in terms of the global commitment of climate change? I think it's extremely important that a group and a gathering that is here focuses not only on the issue of the technology and the best practices and what we learn, but we ask ourselves the deep question of the political economy of how to get nations moving. Ajay talked about Germany buying renewable energy. Morocco invested in solar energy with its own money and put in subsidy in the hopes that Europe would buy that electricity across the Mediterranean, right? I haven't seen Europe make that move. And yet Europe is one of the key continents whose political economy is about climate change. What's preventing Europe from buying from Morocco? When Morocco put its own money in concentrated solar generation, and the World Bank was a partner in it. It's these questions that I believe that you cannot walk away from in asking, because if you do walk away from it, we will not have the ability to find a path to achieve 1.5, if not less, global warming in terms of the world. So, Bhupen Hazarika asks the river, but I think the river is asking us a much deeper question. And I wish you very best in your deliberations.
We thank you, sir. We hope that with the support from the World Bank, more technical knowledge, collective action, and a thorough understanding of countries' political economy, we will move on a more sustained pathway. We also have with us Mr. R.R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow, Terry. Mr. Rashmi has held the position of Special Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change from 2016 to 17, and was also its Joint Secretary from 2008 to 2013. In these roles, he was India's principal negotiator for the UNFCCC. May I now request Mr. Rashmi to please deliver his address.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And climate change is an issue which evokes strong passion. It can evoke strong and lovely poetry as well. But despite the adversity which the rivers face, different sectors of society and the nature, the challenges which we are all going through, the news is, in India at least, is very positive. In fact, I'm thankful to Junaid Ahmed for pointing out that large number of projects sponsored and financed and supported by the World Bank are generating co-benefits to the extent of 60% in India, as far as the climate benefits are concerned. Now, this is a positive signal for the rest of the stakeholders to pick up. I was associated with a recent assessment of the climate change work being done in India, both on the policy and the implementation front. And the people who wrote the report about the G20 countries, including India, they found that the India story is the best amongst the G20 countries. The Climate Action Tracker says that the India's climate policies and the climate actions are closest to the 2-degree curve which countries need to follow amongst the G20 countries. So if this is the assessment internationally by reputed and credible institutions, then I think we need to be quite satisfied, sanguine, but definitely it is not something on which we can rest. We need not rest on our laurels. We need to go beyond that. My own association with the climate change debate, it gives me a certain degree of hope that what is being planned in India is something remarkable. This is remarkable not only because India is yet to become a middle-income country, but also because this gives a hope to the rest of the world that countries which do not have adequate resources can still create a business model or an appropriate investment model which can work despite these adversities. Dr. Mathur was speaking about products, policies, and business models. Policies I'll leave aside for the time being. But if the focus that he was trying to give was that the current products that are available to us, the technology related products, if we are able to use appropriate business models to scale up these technological solutions, I think we can reach where we want to go. My own personal sense is that this may not be enough. We are, as far as India is concerned, the assessments are that India is doing extremely well and we are moving ahead. We are likely to reach the targets well ahead of 2030, which is the dateline. But embedded somewhere in these stories is something which is lost, is that the policies have actually played a very important role. And again, the international experience tells us that it is not enough to simply finance the technologies through an appropriate business model. The incentives in terms of fiscal support or subsidies will reach up to a point, but not beyond that. If there is no adequate support coming from the regulators. So the regulations and the policies have actually played a key role across the world when it's a question of meeting the global goals. A global goal, fortunately, has become a national goal in India, so therefore it is moving. And it is moving because there are 3 clear targets there now for different stakeholders in the Indian economy and the society. The first one, which is that of emissions intensity, everybody talks about, it is actually declining. But it is declining because of energy efficiency. And energy efficiency is something where Bureau of Energy Efficiency has played a very extremely important and key role there. They have used both regulation, promotion, and business models also. The LED is, of course, a finest example of the business model. But behind the LED experiment, there was a lot of promotional and regulatory action taken by the BE, which actually helped move the needle. So it is what I want to emphasize is that energy efficiency is today leading us to reach the emissions intensity target, but very soon we will hit the brakes somewhere, because we have harder to abate sectors. It is not enough to simply improve energy efficiency. It is, of course, a low-hanging fruit, and industries can avail of this with through appropriate business models. But we need to go beyond that. There are sectors which are extremely difficult to address. The transport is one of the key examples. Iron and steel, aluminium, the minerals, the sectors which consume resources. These are all difficult sectors, and we will not be able to move only with the help of energy efficiency in these sectors. We have to find the right technologies, and specific regulatory challenges will have to be created for the stakeholders to move on there. So this is one element of the challenge that is with us. The second part, which is that of the renewables, again, it has moved only because there is a goal laid out by the government through a specific policy. Had this policy not existed, would the variable cost of power have gone down? Of course, the fact that the Germans bought the solar panels in large numbers, it brought the prices down, and we can see a similar thing happening in India. But again, there is a limit to which this can be done, only with the help of the business models. If we can create a capacity, we can bring the notional price of the power, renewable power, down, but we cannot feed it into the grid. The grid cannot be balanced only because the cost of the power is low. The grid has to be balanced. And therefore, the solar power has a larger challenge now in the days ahead. The integration cost of solar into the grid is something which we all have to address. And this will come from technology and regulation. So this is the new challenge. How we do it is something which we are here to work on that. Apart from, and there is also a mistake that we normally do. When we look at the non-fossil fuel sources, we only talk of renewables. We forget about the biofuels. We forget about the other non-electricity sectors. The sectors which I just talked about, the harder to abate sectors in terms of iron and steel, the aluminium, where they actually use fossil fuel as the source of energy. Unless we are able to electrify this entire the energy system, we will not move the needle in the manner that we want it to. The last point which Mr. Junaid Ahmed also was pointing out is about the forestry sector, where we are trying to create carbon sinks. Now, creating a carbon sink is definitely not easy, and definitely not possible within the time frame that we are thinking of. 2030, you cannot grow a tree. Tree grow through a natural process. Trees you cannot create in a matter of 5 years or 10 years. It has to have its own time span. So how do we do this, meet this challenge? And he was talking about the forest areas. They are not growing beyond 23% or 24% that our forest survey report talks about. Why is it that it is not happening? And it will certainly not happen, because the land in India is extremely scarce in any case. Despite the fact that the 200 million people depend on the forest for their livelihoods, we cannot create artificial forests. We have a certain notified area of forests. There are certain open forests as well. But there is a limit to which the forests can grow. So the forest can either, we can grow dense forest, or we can reforest the open areas, which is also not environmentally and ecologically recommended, because open forests also perform their own role. The grasslands, the open forests are a part of the ecosystem. We don't have to touch them. So therefore, the key issue here, as far as the carbon sinks are concerned, how is it, what kind of imaginative policy do we evolve to sequester carbon in an additional manner? And that is the challenge before the Indian policymakers. And again, my own sense is it will not happen through just with the help of investments or finance or business models. It will happen only if we have a specific policy goal. Fortunately, we have a goal. We have a goal of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon to be sequestered in our forests and trees outside forest. The trees outside forest is something which we have completely missed in our debate. This is, I think, this is the area where the potential lies, and we have not used it to the fullest advantage. But how do we incentivize a farmer or an individual or a community to grow trees in their own land? In the forests, we can do it with the help of the budgetary interventions. In the trees outside forest, we cannot do it simply with the help of the budget or the finance or any other governmental source. It has to happen with the help of the markets. This is where we need imaginative market mechanisms. Maybe some kind of carbon pricing for the carbon which is being sequestered in the forest areas and non-forest areas. This is a real policy challenge. What kind of business model we can evolve here will be the answer to this challenge. I'll end by simply by saying that our assessment says that the more ambition in India is certainly within reach. We are talking about moving beyond the current pledges. So the message is that certainly more ambition is possible, but it will not happen on its own, because we have to keep the political challenges in mind. In India, we are we are moving towards elections very soon. And the two things which will capture the imagination of the public and public debate is likely to focus around this is, one is the farmers' distress, and the other one is the stress in the coal sector. And it's not happening because of renewables. The stress in the coal sector is happening because of many other reasons, but it is a politically sensitive sector. The unfortunate part is that the entire decarbonization story that we talk about, the coal has gone off our radar. And my own recommendation or sense is that the decarbonization story must move through the coal sector. Unless we are able to move through a cleaner coal policy, we will not make the policy of energy transition permanent and successful. This is the key political message, I think, which Indian policymakers are struggling with, and this is something which the global community also needs to understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable words highlighting the key role of policy and regulatory action. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Ahmed. As we all know, the support of the World Bank is unparalleled, and we hope we continue to develop innovative solutions through our collaborations. Last but not the least, I would like to thank Dr. Mathur for his continued guidance to TERI. Thank you all. We now will proceed to our first technical session of the day. This session will take stock of the collective climate action enshrined in various NDCs and highlight the need to ratchet up the existing ambition. Further, the discussion will capture the issues and imperatives in effective implementation of the NDCs, the vast opportunities created by NDCs, and the role of subnational and non-state actors in scaling up climate action. This session will be chaired by Mr. R.R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow, TERI. Mr. Rashmi has held the position of Special Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change from 2016 to 17, and was also its Joint Secretary from 2008 to 13. In these roles, he was India's principal negotiator for UNFCCCs. Sir, we are honored to have you. On our panel today, we have Dr. Ursula Hutfilter from Climate Analytics, Mr. Anirban Ghosh, Mahindra Group, India, Mr. S. Albert, Additional Chief Engineer, Water Resources Department, Manipur, and Dr. Emmanuel, Chair, Subsidiary Body for Implementation, UNFCCC. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Ritu. Once again, a very warm welcome to all of you today morning. This session will talk about how we can move beyond the pledges and the issues around effective implementation of the NDCs, not just in India, but globally, but of course with the benefit of an eminent panel, we will have a cross-section of views on various aspects relating to the implementation of NDCs. Paris Agreement was quite imaginatively constructed in the way that the responsibility of implementing the agreement is not only with the governments. For the first time, it involved various stakeholders, and I think that was the French were quite imaginative in that way, and they were able to pull together the various stakeholders from the private sector, from the industry, from the government, the NGOs, and all of them have become formally associated with the implementation of the process. So this is, I would say, quite an innovation in itself. And it will be important for us to listen to the views of different stakeholders of how they look at the specific challenges in implementing the Paris agreements and the NDCs of their respective countries. First of all, the first speaker which we have today is Dr. Ursula Hutfilter. She is a Senior Climate Policy Advisor. based in of the climate analytics based in Western Australia. I would request her, from her perspective as a researcher, as somebody who looks at the governmental and the regulatory actions from the sidelines, from a position of a non-governmental stakeholder, I would like you to focus on what you think are the key issues involved in implementing the NDCs, and what is the current level of commitment of the various governments. How is it that we can enhance? How is it that we can motivate them further to increase their ambition?
Thank you very much, Mr. Rashmi, for this friendly introduction. And I'm very honored to be invited to speak to this important conference and this very important session, and introduce the perspective from the Climate Action Tracker, which is an initiative based on a collaboration of 3 independent research institutions. So this is us, Climate Analytics, and New Climate and Ecofis. And what we are doing is tracking and assessing the progress both at the global level as well as at the country level of where we stand. And of course, since the Paris Agreement, focusing very much on where we stand regarding achievement of the Paris Agreement long-term temperature goal. So we do this at the global level, looking at where commitments, but also where actions, real-world policy is leading us. As has been emphasized, this is what in the end is crucially important for achieving real results. And we focus on country-specific assessments. At this stage, we have 32 countries that we assess that cover something like 80% of the emissions. And then we also track progress for a larger set of countries with regard to decarbonization indicators and how we track achieving real progress also at a sectoral basis and against important benchmarks. So, in a nutshell, what our results, the latest results that we have presented at the COP in December show is that we still have a lack of progress at the global level. So if we assess all the commitments put together for Paris, the pledges and the targets, then we would end up with a warming of 3 degrees instead of the 1.5 limit enshrined in the Paris Agreement long-term temperature goal. And with current policies, so looking at the projections of where we end up with the policies that are really implemented, we even get to a higher level of warming, of median of 3.3. However, and that is very important, and that is something that has been stressed by you, Mr. Rashmi, as well, it's very important to look at what are individual countries doing and what are individual policies doing. And that is something that we are focusing more and more. And we are seeing, and that is encouraging, and I want to focus also on encouraging signals, we are seeing real movement in a number of countries with policies being put in place, and also with some planned policies that are not included in these projections yet. So what we have done is also looking, and that's what's called the optimistic policies scenario. If we look at what countries are planning, what they maybe not have implemented yet, but what they're planning, then we can see a difference already at the global level. So that means that if these initiatives and these movements are extended and expanded, then there is really hope for the global emissions curve to bend downwards, as it has to. Because that is, very briefly, that is, of course, very important since the release of the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees, which gives us guidance about the important benchmarks in terms of global emission pathways, greenhouse gas and also CO2 emission pathways that are very directly relevant for the implementation of and the operationalization of the Paris Agreement long-term temperature goal. And this shows that it's a daunting task, but that it's achievable with real-world technologies and policies. And that is the benchmark that we have also developed as a climate action tracker. I won't go into the details here, but the importance of really decisive action across all the sectors, and that is confirmed also by this IPCC special report. They are possible, and they are very important across all the sectors. I want to highlight, though, the important issue of coal, because it's so crucial for achieving these reductions. And this is something we are increasingly looking at also at the national level. Where are countries with regard to their plans to reduce coal, because that is an important message that comes out of the IPCC special report as well. We need to phase out coal globally from power production by 2050. And our analysis shows that it has to happen much earlier in OECD countries and in the EU member states. And of course, this means we need a policy to ensure a just and fair transition for this sector. And what we are also, what I want to stress as the perspective from our research is the huge importance of acting fast and the way we can really achieve benefits for sustainable development, the co-benefits that have been emphasized by acting fast. The faster we act, the larger the benefits are that we can achieve in terms of immediate benefits for air quality, for improved health, for job creation and wealth creation within countries that are, in particular those that so far are depending on importing fossil fuels. And looking at all these opportunities across all sectors, essentially through renewable energy expansion, electrification of end-use sectors such as transport, but also industry. Now, where do we stand and what do we learn from looking at the individual countries? Because that is the lesson we also learn. When we look at the global level, there are lots of movements in some countries. There are some movements that are setting us back, but in some countries that are moving us forward. So it's important to not just look at the aggregate global level, but really look into what is happening in countries. And we have developed a tracking or an assessment system that moves us beyond just assessing the targets against a whole range of equity criteria, but we're moving more and more towards assessing where current policies are, whether policies are there to meet the targets that countries have put forward, but also how much progress are we actually seeing since 2015, when we have, since Paris, and since the NDCs have been put forward. So the good news is that we have some countries that, as has already been pointed out, we have some countries that already have targets that are consistent with the Paris Agreement 1.5 limit. India is among the countries that has a target that is consistent with the former 2-degree goal, so that is much closer than other countries with a target also regarding the Paris Agreement. And some of these countries, and India is one of them, are showing clear progress, and it's measurable progress in terms of policies being implemented and leading actually to an improvement since 2015, and that is very encouraging. Other countries have targets that are far away from being sufficient, but are also showing clear progress and are showing that they're moving forward, and that means there is a lot of potential to enhance these targets that are currently not sufficient. Other countries that we look at are not showing those signs of progress or only limited progress, and some countries with highly insufficient targets and federal policies that are not moving towards progress, but some of them, looking at the USA, but also Australia, where there is progress at the subnational level, and states and also the private sector taking initiatives, but being hampered by a lack of support at the federal level. what this kind of more granular assessment looks like for countries, and we've done that for all the countries that we're assessing. So for India, indeed, it has a target that is compatible with the former 2-degree goal, and it has policies that are meeting the target and even can overachieve this target. And it's showing clear progress in terms of implemented policies since 2015. And that's very important and very encouraging, and again also shows potential for increasing that level of ambition. And that is very much based on looking at the National Electricity Plan. There's of course a lot of progress and very encouraging progress in uptake of renewable energy. There's an uncertainty about the planning for coal, and that is something that will be very relevant for the emissions level. And there's potential for other aims looking at electrification of transport and then reaching the benefits of renewable energy, then also for the transport sector. If we look at the European Union, that's just the other example that I will name here. It has a target that the Climate Action Tracker has been rating as insufficient. But when we look at the policies and the development since 2015, the projections are getting closer to it actually also achieving this target, but it is insufficient. And policies are showing a clear progress, and some of these policies recently adopted would move the European Union also way beyond the current NDC. So a lot of potential for enhancing this target consistent with these developments. And finally, and that is something that I would like to stress as the final message, and it has already also been said before, we are in the middle of a technology revolution in terms of renewable energy uptake, increasingly now also followed by the developments in storage, battery storage in particular, and electric mobility linked to this technology development. And these technology development are already leading to emissions being, the projected emissions having to be corrected downwards. That's happening even in the US, despite the federal government not supporting this. It's happening in Chile with record low cost of renewable energy, paving the way for adopting a policy and a plan. Similarly in Argentina, and as I said in the EU, that the European Union, based on a new assessment of the costs and the benefits, has increased its renewable energy target considerably. And this shows, and that has also been analyzed, all these NDCs have been developed with in a different world, under different assumptions that have to be revised in terms of what we know about technology costs. But the other element that is very important is that we do need the policies to support this technology development, as it has also happened in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hartfilter. It was quite informative. Of course, your findings about India are, by and large, well received, and they are known to most of us. But your assessments about European Union and countries like Argentina and others, it does give a hope that there is a further potential, and in terms of renewables alone, which she has been emphasizing, there is a potential for further growth, and the targets in several countries can include a much larger quantum of renewables as a target. So this gives a certain degree of hope. Now the next speaker or a panelist with us is Mr. Anirban Ghosh. He is the Chief Sustainability Officer of one of the largest corporates in India, the Mahindra Group, and it's a US $19 billion group, a very important stakeholder and key player in India. In fact, you must be knowing that they are one of the few corporates in India who have undertaken announced their ambition of becoming completely carbon neutral by 2040. And so he has been associated with development of a sustainability framework for the Mahindra Group, and I commend him for this. He has also been the founding member of the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition. So with his knowledge and his association with these environmental initiatives, I'm sure he can bring the perspective of the private sector, the large corporates, and key stakeholder into this process. So, Mr. Ghosh.
Thank you, Mr. Rashmi. Most of the stories that I could tell you, you possibly already know. In this room, one doesn't have to talk about why we are facing the issue of climate change. Perhaps you also know that about 90 corporations around the world contribute to 67% of emissions. While we are not one of the 90, the message is clear that industry needs to step up and take some action. So the question is, what sort of action, and how do you answer the question, is this enough? I guess in the area of climate action, we are moving from reporting to commitments, from initiatives to programs, and the question, is this enough, becomes very important. So while trying to answer this question, it becomes fairly obvious that now that the Paris Agreement is in place and the nation has made commitments, whatever action gets taken within the corporation should be aligned to these goals and targets. In fact, very often we've been asked by people from the government that you all are going and committing all of this, how will we prevent double counting? So the answer is very easy. We're doing all of this to help you meet your target, so there is no double counting. And in the process, we realize that you begin by making some sort of a commitment which you think is large, and then over time you realize that much more is possible than what you originally thought was possible, which is probably the story that was playing out in Ursula's slides across nations. It's the same for our business group, and it finds itself expressed in the form of a Talanoa dialogue, which we've titled Desire and Discovery. You begin with a desire to do something good, and you discover that you can do a whole lot more. So these two themes of desire and discovery and alignment to the Paris goals as well as the NDCs is what has guided the action that the Mahindra Group has chosen to take. So, as you know, one of India's major commitments at Paris is about reducing emissions intensity. And a lot of the work that we've done contributes to that. And that we began actually by saying that we will double energy productivity. And about 5 of our companies have come forward and made that commitment. By and by, one company came and said, we will do 100% renewable energy. And then we put in place a carbon pricing system to be able to fund some of this work. And as we were trying to work on energy efficiency and renewable energy, we discovered, okay, we can get a little bit more ambitious, and said we will do science-based targets. And then finally, Mr. Mahindra announced that the group will become carbon neutral by 2040. So it happened in stages, and every one of these steps was a sort of incremental build-up on the previous step and was aligned to what India wanted to do and where the world wanted to get. Similarly, in the area of renewable energy, we have a very ambitious commitment of 40% non-fossil fuel energy by 2040. If all this renewable energy is going to be generated in the country, somebody has to buy it. And I guess the first buyers are not going to be households, so it has to be industry. And so it makes sense for industry to put its hand up and say that we will be 100% renewable energy powered, whoever can bring it in the realm of their possibility. Because all it will do is create a lot of demand in the system and will make sense to put more supply in, just the way ESL did for LEDs, just the way Germany did for renewable energy in their country. So if corporations step up and say, yes, if renewable power is available, we commit to being 100% renewable energy powered, I think the story of renewable energy in India, which is moving very well, can just accelerate at a pace which you and I can't dream of today. The third area, which is very important for India, and we've heard a lot of conversation on that, is about afforestation and creating a carbon sink. Almost 10 years ago, I don't know what led to that desire, but as we grew up in this country, we knew that our forests were being cut down, trees were being cut down, we were losing tree cover. So the Mahindra Group had made a commitment to plant 1 million trees a year. Gradually, that run rate has increased. It has reached 2 million trees a year now. And the cumulative number of trees that the group has planted is now 15 million as on date. A study showed that survival rates are somewhere between 78% and 85%. So out of the 15 million, at least 10 to 11 million trees are still out there. And there is a very deep story on how it is being used for social forestry and how it contributes to livelihoods, but let's leave that for another time. Let's just stay with the climate and building a carbon sink. In the commitment to becoming carbon neutral, there is the expectation that by 2030, another 20 odd million trees, if not more, will get planted. And if we add up the potential for carbon sequestration from the trees planted only by the Mahindra Group, chances are that our contribution to the national target will be somewhere between 1% and 2%. So if just 100 of our thousands of companies were to come forward and participate in this program, India's goals will get met. So that's how the group has looked at aligning its work towards helping the nation achieve its NDCs, towards the Paris Agreement being met. And all along the way, however, I must emphasize that apart from doing good, this is all good for business. And if there is one thing one would want to say, that why does the corporation do it, I'm reminded of a phrase used in some other context which says, it's all about money, honey. And it's great for the corporation. It's great for the bottom line. It's great for the future of the corporation. And by doing this work, we are able to tell the analysts, we are able to tell the funders that these steps will help us make more money in the short run and will reduce the risk of our disappearing in the long run. And that's all you really want a corporation to say when you're looking at it from a financial perspective. So that's how we've been going about doing things. Though I must close by saying that when we make these commitments, such as science-based targets, such as carbon neutrality, I can't honestly tell you that we know the complete path to get there. We possibly know 60%, 70%. We have an idea of what we need to do, and we have an expectation of what's going to happen in the ecosystem. I don't think you can get greater clarity than that. But like we said in the story of desire and discovery, if you get started when you know 60-70% of the path, chances are you will discover the other 30% without too much difficulty. Since today is the day for Bengali poetry, and we had a gentleman from Bangladesh, I thought it would be appropriate to close by quoting some words from the national poet of Bangladesh, Qazi Nazrul Islam, who again, in some other context, wrote a poem that began, Durgam Giri Kantar Moru Dustor Parabar Longhite Hobe Ratri Nishite Jatrira Hushiyar. Translated loosely, it would mean, travelers beware, in the darkness of night, we will have to cross insurmountable mountains, endless deserts, and fathomless oceans, which is somewhat what the climate action story seems to be like, where we don't necessarily know all the solutions, but in this gathering air pollution, we will have to try and find our way. So this is how the Mahindra Group is helping. I know there are many other corporations in India who are doing admirable work. The Tatas, the Dalmia Cement, who I'm sure Mr. Singhi will be speaking somewhere at at this conference. But we will need many more people to step forward and take concerted action to ensure that India meets its NDCs and the Paris Agreement is met. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ghosh. It's indeed very heartening to note that large corporate houses like that of Mahindra have taken the Paris Agreement seriously, and they have now voluntarily taken up pledges to become carbon neutral or to take certain steps which help in an incremental way. He, as he said, he doesn't know the full path. And of course, given the fact that there is still no mandate from the government for the businesses, it is still a national commitment, economy-wide, but there is no sectoral or business level commitment or regulation in India for the specific groups of industries. And it's indeed extremely encouraging to see groups like his coming forward to take up such commitments. I think it is a time has come when we really need to start a campaign and spread this message around, that the business decisions, if they are taken on the basis of environmental sustainability, it will mean a lot. It will help not just the business, as he says, it will help them make money, but also protect the environment. Thank you very much. The next speaker now, which we have with us, is will be presenting to us a perspective from the state governments. We have the Additional Chief Engineer, Mr. S. Albert from the Government of Manipur. We, as many of you may be knowing, in India there is a process of preparing state action plans on climate change. All the states in India have more or less prepared such state action plans. Manipur happens to be one of them. And located in the northeastern part of the country, some of the key challenges that they face is that of managing their floods, the watersheds, and their forests. So we will be hearing from Mr. Halbert about how the state government, as a constituent of the entire climate change discourse, how they look at this problem and what is it that they would like to flag as a key concern.
Thank you, sir. I come from a very small state in the northeastern part of India, as Sir R.R. Rashmi has just said. He was at the helm of the state's bureaucracy as the chief secretary there. So I'll just go through with you with some of the problems we have faced in the past, that of flooding mainly, and a small glimpse of the state level action plan on climate change. In the wake of climate change and based on the recommendations of the National Action Plan on Climate Change, the state of Manipur has prepared a state action plan on climate change in the year 2013, identifying vulnerable sectors, its probable impacts, and essential activities to be implemented. However, due to the shortage of the state's budgetary sources, it has not been possible to initiate all these activities. Water resources, a vulnerable sector. Probable impacts are increased river flow with potential damage to river banks, in a dry situation, drying up of rivers, increased evaporation, runoff, and decreased soil moisture recharge. Water pollution, siltation, and scarcity of fresh drinking water. Impact of climate change on water resources in Manipur. Manipur is vulnerable to water-induced disasters because of its location in the eastern Himalayan periphery, fragile geo-environmental setting, and economic underdevelopment. Most of the surface water resources in the state are currently witnessing threats from heavy siltation, raid, uncontrolled quarrying activities in the catchment areas, increasing pH levels at wetlands, etc., which are ultimately resulting in water quality deterioration. The trend in precipitation in the northeastern region, including Manipur, and the projected patterns of precipitation and evaporation predict considerable spatial variability in water yield in the 2030s. The state lies in one of the rain-fed regions of the country and receives appreciable amount of rainfall, which is unevenly distributed precipitation throughout the year, with peak rainfall during monsoon period. However, because of the hilly topography, groundwater does not get to recharge over a period of time. I'll just go through the slideshow. As we all know, climate change is expected to impact global sustainable development. So the water resources system in Manipur consists of the Manipur River Basin, Barak River Basin, and Chindwin Basin. The state has, in the past few years, faced the fury of climate change in the water sector. There has been recurrent floods, flash floods, due to increase in the intensity of rainfall, which has increased over the years in its intensity and frequency. On the 13th of June last year, there was heavy flooding where even the residence of the Chief Secretary was not spared. An area of about 15,000 odd hectares of the valley area was inundated. Schools and offices had to be shut. 75 millimeters of rainfall was recorded on the 13th of June on the upstream reaches of the catchment area, which happened to be the highest recorded rainfall. The problem we face is not as big in scope and magnitude as those faced by the Brahmaputra, those living besides the Brahmaputra. But all the same, it causes a lot of mayhem and it brings untold hardships to the people. These are some of the pictures during the period of inundation. Where we failed is we do not have any real-time monitoring networks. And unfortunately, we have been lagging behind and we still do not have a river basin master plan. And our problem is the absence of forecasting and modeling, like real-time data assessment system or flood early warning system. And we are lacking in strengthening of critical river bunds due to lack of funds, and we have not been able to take up immediate river training works at confluence point of rivers. Now, the issues to be addressed are water pollution, heavy siltation of the rivers, scarcity of water during the lean season, not only for drinking but also for irrigation, then flash floods, and as we said earlier, strengthening of bunds and embankments. So we need funding options for the damaged portion and forecasting and a holistic plan. Before the formulation of its state action plan on climate change in the year 2013, the state has been initiating various programs in the state. The state has taken up the execution of 8 major multipurpose and medium irrigation projects, river valley projects, of which most of them are complete. Under the nationally determined contributions of Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, Har Khet Ko Pani, we are executing 2 projects right now, that of the Thobal Multipurpose Project and Dolai Thabi Barrage Project. To be future ready, Manipur needs a comprehensive and integrated water resources management plan to ensure a sustainable future and to tackle the challenges of climate change. There is a crucial role to be played by institutional funders, development institutions, and research organizations to facilitate the state in making concrete milestone-based implementation plans with both short-term response measures and long-term resilience building measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Albert, for presenting the state government's views and what you intend to do with your climate action plan. Now, we have the last speaker with us and a very eminent person with us, Mr. Emmanuel Dlamini. He is a very well-known face in the international climate negotiating circles. He is currently the head of the SBI under the UNFCCC and leads the negotiating process on the planning and implementation of the various actions under the UNFCCC. So I welcome him here, and through him we will be able to get the perspective of the UN system, how they look at the current process unfolding and where we are headed. So Mr. Dlamini.
Thank you very much, Rashim, and greetings to all participants of this session. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the World Bank, who has made it possible for me to be part of this meeting. And I am very happy and honored to sort of give a presentation, especially on the work of the SBI, which is one of the established body under the United Nations Framework Convention, which mainly deals with the implementation of the convention. And I hope at this point we all familiar with the objectives of the convention, which basically in a nutshell is telling us, human beings, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to a level and within a time frame which will allow the ecosystems to adapt naturally and food security not being threatened, as well as development to proceed in a sustainable manner. So before I say much, it is clear that the convention has recognized the sustainable development goals, and at the time it was still the Millennium Development Goals. And in an effort to achieve the objective, the process has taken a number of processes. One of them is the Kyoto Protocol, where developed countries had a target on a certain number of cases to reduce within a time frame as well, which was a 5-year period. But as the whole process progressed, it was realized that the world is changing, the economy is growing. There are some countries who are now having emerging economies who are now becoming more, somehow have raised their emissions. And it was seen that it is important that we all contribute towards that. Then we went on to the 2-track system, where developed countries were expected to take up quantified economy-wide reduction targets, and developing countries were also expected to take up nationally appropriate mitigation actions. These are all efforts toward within the pre-2020 period. But then it was clear that what will happen then after 2020, and it was then that the idea of having all parties taking up mitigation efforts as well as building resilience came about. it has been negotiated, and this led to the Paris Agreement, which somehow, with a lot of interest from parties, that is, countries who have ratified the convention, it was ratified and came into force well in advance. It was expected that it would come into force in 2020, but for the interest that it has built among parties, it was ratified, I think, in 2017 or 2017. So then we have the Paris Agreement. It is certainly under the convention as well. It's trying to achieve the objective of the convention. And the Paris Agreement is also setting a limit, which is to limit a temperature rise to 2 degrees with the views of remaining at 1.5. It is also setting a time frame that we have to do this in the 21st century. And also, it is also using the same sectors and gases that have been seen as main contributors to the global warming, leading to climate change. So that means that the Paris Agreement is one of the instruments that parties have taken up. And their efforts and actions are taken up within the NDC. It started as an intended, but then when the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, then they become nationally determined contributions. So they are really in the heart of the Paris Agreement. They are national in scope, and they cover all the greenhouse gas emissions by all major sources and by removals by sinks. As I have indicated that the convention is linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, it so follows that the Paris Agreement also mentions specifically the Sustainable Development Goals. As such, it means it is also linked in that way. So basically, the Paris Agreement is calling upon parties to reduce their emissions as well as build resilience, which is basically adaptation, communicating the adaptation. While efforts are made within all the astrostructures, we will note that within the convention, certain structures have been established, which are also relatively young, as well as the Paris Agreement, which includes the Adaptation Committee, which addresses adaptation, the Technology Network, which adapts technology, and the GCF, the Global Climate Fund, which adapts the funding of. So, parties have already submitted their NDCs, which were converted, and their INDCs, which were converted to NDCs in 2015. About 189 parties did that, and I think the convention has got about 197 parties, so you could see that that was not a small number. The NDCs that have been submitted, they certainly covers a number of sectors, but not all parties are covering all the sectors as well as the gases. And it is quite clear that some of them, they provided additional information for them to sort of implement them and achieve the objective of the Paris Agreement as well as the convention. Some of those additional information included market-based mechanisms, support for implementation, which includes technology support, capacity buildings, and finance, response measures, as well as economic diversification. Now, the convention has called upon parties to submit again or revise their NDC by 2020. That's when the Paris Agreement is coming to force. And thereafter, they will submit every 5 years. So those countries who have submitted in the NDC for a 5-year period will submit them in 2020, and those who have submitted for a 30-year period will have to revise their NDC, and thereafter every 5 years. The aim of the NDC is to limit the temperature rise. But unfortunately, at this point in time, studies are telling us that the temperature rise is already at 1.7. And certain analyses are clear that the submitted NDCs will not take us to anywhere below 3.7 as they stand. So it means at the moment they are not adequate in any sense. But then for countries to implement the NDC, it follows that each country will have to prepare for and undertake implementation for NDC in different ways. There is no one way that countries will do that because countries are not really in the same economical development level. Some of the countries will be target-based, and others will focus primarily on policies and actions. Those which are target-based, they probably will be quantified or economic-based, and some will probably be taking actions and policy, delivering appropriate policy. And it also will depend on how this, it also depends on how this will be, was developed, whether it's a bottom-up or a top-down approach, the way the countries put them. But in a nutshell, we also need to take stock of this process already. The Talana Dolek has been put into place, which was giving us an indication. We've also got the report from the IPCC on the 1.5, and I think the process will also have to take a stock to this. There will also be a need for reporting. I'm sorry, I just have to quickly wind up because of time constraint. There will also be a need of reporting. We need to build up from existing processes. There are existing processes on reporting. There are the binary updates. There are the binary reports. We've got the international monetary assessments, where we look at how countries are performing. This will be translated to the new transparency framework which has been developed under the country. We also have to look into financing, where public financing remains important, but there must be leverage to private financing. We also want to bring out non-state actors to come in, which has been mentioned. And also, it will be important, as I conclude, because of time, that we develop a mechanism, framework approaches that will allow us to able to put an international price to carbon. I think that will help to sort of increase our ambitions, because if we can bring the market, the carbon market, to the international community, then we will be able to increase the economy, because once there is a carbon price, then the demand for exchange of carbon and buying and selling of carbon will certainly provide the opportunity to exchange technology, the opportunity to build some finances and so forth. So I think, to conclude, the process, the UNFCCC process, is very important that we all sort of follow, because that's the only way we could know what is happening in the various countries. That's the only process that can help us to understand that we are actually achieving the goal or not. So with those few remarks, and in the interest of time, I will leave it there. But if there are any need for further clarification and probably expanding the understanding, I will be happy to do that bilaterally during lunch or during coffee time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tamini. Thank you very much for your interesting perspective. He mentioned that the transparency framework has been put in place, the rules have been agreed, the rules of reporting have now been put in place, and there is also a process for global stocktake which he was referring to. And one of the interesting points which he has raised is that there needs to be a carbon price, a global carbon price. Now this is an issue which is still under a discussion. One of the last milestones which we have to achieve under the UNFCCC process is that of the Article 6. Article 6 is still not agreed, and therefore the ideas which he has put forward about international approaches to fixing an international carbon price, which is a part of the market issues under Article 6. It will be an interesting discussion, whether there should be a global price or the carbon price should be determined nationally, whether there should be an explicit price or an implicit price. These are all issues which the private sector, I am sure, they must be considering themselves. When, for example, a group like Mahindra says that they will become carbon neutral, obviously they have a carbon price for themselves, an implicit price which they are building into their decision-making process. So how is it that we can articulate this whole thing at a global level and in national policies, in national targets? He said there are some countries which are going to take targets, some countries will do it by policies. So how is it that this is finally going to be articulated is an interesting question which we will all discuss. So thank you very much. Now we have actually run short of our allotted time span, but I would still, I'll seek your indulgence because we have heard, listened to a cross-section of interesting views. We can sit for 5 minutes, and if there are any questions, they can be addressed to the panelists. So the house is open. Kindly introduce yourself and address it to the panelist from where you want the answer.
Sahil from Brookings. I'm a fellow at Brookings, India. My question is specifically to Ursula and in general, I think to Mr. Anirban as well. It's specifically with regard to electrification of transport. And we're talking that it leads to lower carbon emissions, and I just want to understand by how much are we talking? What are the orders of magnitude when we talk in terms of global emissions? How much can electrification of transport? Because electric vehicles are serious investments all around, and we need to understand how much will they lead to in terms of emissions reduction. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, that's an important question. The premise is that to achieve the Paris Agreement long-term temperature goal, what the latest range of scenarios that the IPCC has analyzed show is that we need to decarbonize the energy system, the total energy system, by mid-century, roundabout. And looking at the options for decarbonizing the transport sector, of course, a lot can be done and achieved by shifting transport to public transport with lots of benefits for urban development and so on. And of course, efficiency is also very important, but all that doesn't get to really decarbonization. So decarbonization of transport, the options that turn out to be the robust ones, technologically but also economically, are electrification, either through direct electric mobility, with the progress that we're having in technology development, especially batteries, or also indirectly through fuels that come from renewable energy generated electricity, This can be hydrogen fueled. That's, for example, interesting maybe for heavy duty transport, maybe for aviation, or synthetic fuels based on renewable, 100% decarbonized electricity. So that's the background, really, the order of magnitude. That is because we need decarbonization, so reaching zero emissions.
Let me look at that question from two lenses. One, the economic lens. I don't think we have a choice whether we want to invest in the electrification of mobility or not, simply because the technologies and the cost of the technology is taking a path by which better solutions in mobility will all be electrified. You and I will prefer to buy an electric vehicle because it will be better than a fossil fuel powered vehicle and will soon be more affordable. Whether the electrification will have high impact on emissions, I guess what you're looking for is a number. Chances are Brookings knows the number as well as we do, but depending on the report you read, I hear numbers between 4% to 10% as being the contribution of the mobility sector. Now, I suppose it depends on what you include, whether you take shipping, aviation, trucking, cars, all of it together or not, and that's what leads to the variation in the number. The Mission Possible report, which is in front of me now, has a 30% number for steel, cement, trucking, aviation and shipping taken together. So I'm guessing the 4 to 10% number is a reasonable expectation. So those are the two lenses. I think it's big enough to act on. And as far as corporations are concerned, I don't think we have a choice.
Just two more questions, please, now, I think. Yeah, the gentleman here.
Hello everyone, I am Chetan Singh Solanki, faculty from IIT Bombay. So looking at the context where we are still talking about energy access to billions of people, and the technology price, particularly photovoltaic, is going down very, very significantly, and battery technology will also follow when it will have significant reduction. So in this context, isn't it better to go for the decentralized even electrification? Because right now when we talk about even solar technology, for example, India has spent a lot of time and energy building the big centralized power plant. However, in the context of the climate change, maybe it is better because the people are distributed in nature, the energy needs are distributed, and if you can
Centralized
generate
power.
Yeah, so if you focus on more decentralized, it will help in the path of the climate mitigation, climate change mitigation. Thank you.
Ursula, would you like to?
Yes, indeed. That's an important part of the solution that is enabled by the development of renewable energy, that it can offer both centralized and decentralized solutions. So that will always depend, of course, on the country, and particularly in India, but also in other countries. That is a very important element. We're decentralized, and there's a range of solutions ranging from off-grid to microgrid solutions that are enabled by renewable energy technology, in particular solar, but also wind.
I must add my bit here is that the current discourse is equally split between between the two. Whether we need to rely on a completely grid-supplied electricity or decentralized renewable electricity, the jury is out. And in fact, the balance of discussion is moving in favor of the grid. More so because of the reliability of energy supply system. And in a country like India, where the energy access goals are almost nearing completion, not in the fullest sense, not in terms of reliability and stability, but at least notionally this is being done. So the economics of energy access and whether we need to do it through the decentralized power systems based on renewables, or we need to strengthen the grid and make it available everywhere, this I think we need a further discussion, and we need to do some more research on this. Yes.
Eugene Twice, my name. I work for Natural Eco Capital in West Africa. In your summation, Rashmi, you have talked about the issues relating to the carbon pricing and, of course, the non-agreement to Article 6 or something like that. But my question straightforwardly to Emmanuel is, what are those impediments relating to developing the framework you talked about on the framework for pricing or market carbon pricing? What are really the impediments? I know it's been talked here and there. He made allusion to some of the reasons, but straightforwardly, what are those reasons?
Thank you very much. I think if we were to come up with a market mechanism of this sort, then we need sort of to have something like international registry, international controls, for which all member countries will agree to it. It's not that it's an impediment, but we need to negotiate that. We need to sort of come up with a framework that can be agreeable to all countries, taking into the fact that this system should not be non-primitive to countries, and it should respect sovereignty. And it should also try to avoid offsetting the carbon, because that will not help us to achieve the objective. So it's not an easy process. It has been done with the Kyoto Protocol, but there were a lot of shortfalls in trying to make sure that they are effective, and some countries didn't like the mechanism, so they're trying to improve it now. So there is a process that is ongoing, but it is not an easy process. And fortunately enough, we've got one co-facilitators of Article 6 amongst us here, who you can approach, and probably will tell you more about the challenges and the different thoughts that are coming from countries on this particular subject. Thank you very much.
Time permitting, we would have perhaps taken this lead and gone across one of the tables, but I think we have finished our time span. So I must thank all the panelists for an extremely enriching and lively discussion. And thank you all also for having patience with us and having patiently listened to their discourse. And at the end, we would like to just recognize the speaker's contribution by giving a token of memento from Terry's side to the speakers.